In this review, we will look at The Forest, a game released back in 2014. It's a survival horror game published by End Night Games. And as I suggest in the title to this video, I call The Forest an inspired but ultimately bland and mundane survival horror experience. I will explain why I say this, and I'll do so by looking at both pros and cons of The Forest. So to begin, we can look at a bit about the story. You play as a survivor of a jet or airplane crash that crashes over a forest on some unknown sort of territory. The plot armor is immediately strong because everyone else on that airplane perishes, but you, as the protagonist, and your son both survive. But as you awaken from the crash, you see your son, called Timmy, being kidnapped by some tribesman or unknown assailant. And then the story progresses as you have to track down Timmy and save him. So that's pretty much the story in a nutshell, which I wouldn't say is much of a story, but it's something that will keep you going and give you a purpose in the game. So some of the good things about The Forest is, at least on the initial notice, is the suspense the game produces. So you have to survive basically in this forest and its surroundings against a sort of, not only against the natural elements like hunger, thirst, and the weather and things like disease, but also against a sort of tribe or a group of tribesmen, but who are sort of cannibals, and some of them have the appearances of, say, zombies or mutants. They definitely are humanoid in appearance, but don't seem to be very human. And talking about the enemy, you will come across them in the wild, or they will come across you. They're always roaming the forest and sort of doing their own thing. They come in a variety. So there's not a great variety, but you got different ones, like ones that look more human, ones that wear sort of armor or wear different garments, and you got some that look like mutants. Got a couple of them that are clearly monsters or combinations of limbs put together into one sort of beast. And these sort of creatures roam the countryside in groups. Sometimes they do it solo, but groups can range from anything from 2 to 5 or 6. In my playthrough, I played The Forest on hard, so I always was on the lookout for these groups because I would pretty much be killed in a fight against 2 or more enemies at once, just because the game is that much tougher. Another strong element to The Forest is the crafting and base building tools. These are cool features because not only does the base building give you a variety of options of structures to build, but it also allows you to engage in your expression. So you can build it and customize your base to how you want it. And often the base is essential because it will protect you against the enemies that roam the world. You can build surrounding barricades and fences that can keep you safe. And these will require quite a few resources to create. So you'll have to often go into the forest and mine, or like chop down wood, chop down trees and bushes, trees for wood, bushes for leaves. And you chop and you can pick up rocks, and these are all elements that you can combine to build structures. And some of these structures are essential to survival. For example, you need to make sure that your character does not die from thirst, so you can build a rain catcher device, which will require hunting a shell from a turtle, as well as hunting for sticks to build this little structure. And there are many other elements. You got cabins, you got shelters, you got traps, and all sorts of structures that can just help you in the world. You also are able to make weapons, or you find weapons if you start off with a sort of pickaxe, but you can soon unlock an axe, and you can pick up clubs from enemies that you down, and these can be customized with other items you find in the world. The customization the crafting and customization is quite strong. So you have the option to create sort of different items. You can, for example, make a Molotov by combining alcohol with a cloth. And there are many different items in the world you can find, from teeth to leaves to different herbs to obviously the basic crafting things like sticks and stones and so on. And these invite quite a lot of experimentation as you learn what the different elements can combine to make. There are some survival elements that I mentioned. You obviously have to watch your thirst and hunger. You also have to keep warm, so that requires building a small campfire. And you can save your progress in the game by sleeping, which you sleep in shelters or cabin logs or log cabins and so on, which are essential if you want to save your progress. Another very strong aspect to the forest I found was that the enemy AI is very unpredictable. So they sort of program these enemy creatures, they're sort of programmed to have different responses to you, and you never know what response you will get. So sometimes they will just watch you from a distance and do nothing. Sometimes they'll see you and just run off. Sometimes they'll see you and just charge at you, or sometimes they'll hover around before deciding what to do, or they'll call other enemies to the vicinity, or it seems, at least, I'm not sure if it happens, but they run off and bring other enemies with them to come and attack you. So the enemy AI is quite rich, and I haven't really experienced this in video games before, and I think this is definitely a strong point. You just never know what is going to happen when you come across one of these tribesmen or groups of them. So that wraps up mostly the strong elements to the forest, but there are some weaknesses that I think bring down the experience. For one, you will find yourself in caves, but these caves are, for some reason, the game is really, really dark. So in caves and at night in the open world, you can barely see anything in front of you. You'll unlock a torch later on in the game, but you will mostly have to use a lighter to see around yourself. But this is very, very small, and you can barely see anything. So you have little incentive to explore in the dark. Caves are also way too mazy. You can't see where you're going. They have different tunnels going in different directions. It feels like you can get lost very easily, and so on. There are no cutscenes in the game. Not every game has to have cutscenes, but cutscenes are nice, especially in survival horrors. There's nothing really to speak about here. There's no narrative elements in the sense that there are no voiceovers or anything like that. You just got a plain story, as I explained earlier, and you work your way through it. The silent protagonist, well, your protagonist is silent. He doesn't speak. He makes basic human sounds like snorts and whimpers and things like that, and breathing. But beyond that, there's no sound, which is very strange, and it doesn't quite work in my view, especially later on in the game as you come across subjects in the world that are alive and are clearly significant to the character, and you just basically don't speak to them, and it's just very weird. There are quite a few bugs. Enemies clip through the walls, especially the barricades around my settlement. Other things, like, which were slightly more annoying, was that objects or items that I collected in the world, like resources, would just sort of be shot off into the sky. For example, I brought a whole bunch of sticks on a cart back to my settlement, and the game world thought it appropriate to shoot my whole collection into the sky and into the nearby lake, which meant I wasted all that time collecting objects in the world. So there are a few bugs here and there that will be of annoyance. You can also see that the game does not look amazing graphically. It's quite plain and standard. This might be due to the budget nature of the game and the budget that the developers had to work with. You see this especially in reused models. You'll come across various sort of people or dead people in the world that were on the flight with you, and they sort of have been killed by the enemy creatures, but you'll notice reused models all over the place, which just looks cheap. Another thing I didn't quite like was the forests. Well, the forest itself, I felt it lacked a lot of density and depth. The forest is mostly just trees scattered around and a couple of bushes, but I felt that other games have really represented forests much more attractively and much more realistically than the forest, which is quite an indictment given the name of this game. I found that there weren't many places, for example, among shrubs or plants or vegetation that enemies could hide within and sort of jump out. And I thought that was quite lacking. So overall, I think the Forest is an inspired game. The developers try to create something that is suspenseful, and it is suspenseful, especially in the early hours as you come across these enemies in the open world. But I think is ultimately a bland game. You sort of There's not much more to do than just create your own camp or your own base. The exploration is okay. You'll come across sort of different structures in the world, like, for example, a campsite with different tents that has been abandoned, and you can sort of ransack it for items and resources. But these are not enough to make the open world exciting to explore. I felt it was quite bland. The story is very average. It's sort of it's stock standard, nothing impressive. So I think it's an inspired but ultimately bland survival horror experience. And if you want to play it, I won't object. I think you can get it for a good price, and that will make it worth it. But yeah, that's how I see The Forest.